How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, giving you guys your weekly forecast of what the fuck is going on in the universe for February 18th through February 25th of 2019. Thank you guys so much for being here and liking and commenting and sharing and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'm so glad you could be here this week. This week we're starting off with a bang, as you might know, or as you might remember from what I talked about last week. This Monday we have the Sun going into Pisces, we have Chiron going into Aries, we have Venus conjoining Saturn, and we have Mercury conjoining Neptune as Mercury enters shadow before it goes retrograde. And if you guys haven't watched it yet, go ahead and check out my Mercury retrograde video that I just did. Super informative. I did a new layout and a new style of like how I did my graphics, so I really hope it helps you guys. So if you haven't checked that out yet, go and check that out. However, this week is also not really super big. We start off on this Monday, with a lot of stuff going on. And then as we get into Tuesday, we have the full moon in Virgo, which it is going to be trining Mars, and then later on the moon's going to be trining Saturn, trining Venus. So it seems like it's a very productive full moon. But then not a lot really happens until we get about, Thursday? It's going to be Friday. We have Venus conjoining Pluto, and we have Mercury squaring Jupiter for the first time. It's going to be one of three. And then by the time we get to next Monday, we're going to have Venus conjoining the South Node, which is a pretty big deal. So basically what I'm trying to say is Monday starts off with a bang. Tuesday we have that full moon. Things get a little bit more not so crazy or intense or hectic during the week, the work week. And then by the time we get to this weekend, things start to kind of turn the page a little bit more. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into the horoscope. So starting off today on Monday the 18th, as we have the Sun now in Pisces, it's not Aquarius season anymore where it could have felt a little cold and cruel and, just not as fun as we've wanted it to be, or I should say as I wanted it to be. But as the Sun goes into Pisces now, things are a little bit more open, a little bit easier to express, a little bit easier to not be so, conforming. It's easier to not have so many walls or boundaries. You can just be flowing with and kind of just go with the energy. So as we go into Pisces season, this is also a mutable sign. This is about not initiating change, but going through change. Not initiating something to start with, but kind of like, what do we have to wrap up in order to start something new? That's the whole mutable modality. Now, as we also have Chiron going into Aries, I've talked about this a couple times, but I also did a whole video about that you guys should check out. But now that Chiron's in Aries, I just want to bring up the fact that, this whole sense of Pisces stuff, I don't want to say it's not going to be as deep as it was, but it's not going to be so, painful as it's been for the past, years that Chiron's been in Pisces. So now that Chiron's in Aries and we're focusing on that type of work, I feel like this Pisces season is really going to be a lot more refreshing than it usually is. And we really get to have a lot more fun with the Neptune placement that's going on in Pisces now that Chiron's finally out of there. And with Venus conjoining Saturn on Monday too, this is, this is kind of like, hey, what do I value? What do I want to secure? What do I want to build? And how do we have the boundaries for that? How do we apply rules and discipline to the things that we do value, the things that we do want to achieve? How do we get serious about these things? And how do we kind of address Saturn with this like, hey, this is what I want to do. This is the work I'm putting in. Here's my credentials. Here you go. Let's get to work. And then with Mercury conjoining Neptune today, which is the big thing I wanted to hit on, since I feel like I talked a lot about Venus conjoining Saturn last week, Mercury conjoining Neptune is going to be really interesting because this is going to play out in a bigger way. Because now on Tuesday, on the 19th, we are having this full moon in Virgo, which is going to be important because it's highlighting Mercury. And now with the Sun in Pisces, the things are a little bit more easier, things are a little bit more open and refreshing, a little bit more deeper because of that water aspect, but a little bit more flow with. Now that the moon's going to be in Virgo and we're going to have this full moon, this is really about realizing, hey, what are the specifics that I need to tend to? What are the things that I need to take care of? What lists, what's on your list basically of things to get done, things to take care of, things to speculate, things to criticize almost in a sense. And as this full moon in Virgo happens, it is highlighting Mercury. Mercury is now on top of Neptune in its shadow, in its detriment in Pisces. And this is where it's kind of like, this full moon in Virgo wants us to realize things, wants us to be specific, and wants us to see the fine details and read the fine print. But Mercury's on top of Neptune, where Mercury's like, but man, this just looks so good. I can't read all this right now. It's kind of like, I have really good vision, but I know a lot of people have, struggle with smaller letters and stuff like that. It's hard for them to see. So it's kind of like this Mercury and Neptune can kind of be blurring your vision with the smaller print and the finer detail stuff. And so as Mercury's on top of Neptune, and it's kind of like, things are very open and susceptible to change and confusion, this full moon in Virgo is kind of like, hey, before you just get sold on the idea of what things could be on, Neptune is idealism, before you get wrapped up all in that stuff, really take a second, and if you can't read over the fine print, really think about things and consider all of your different options. And as this full moon in Virgo happens, where it really is about, hey, what are we realizing? What are we thinking about? What do we need to address? What do we need to, pinpoint is a good way to put it. It's like, basically putting your checklist, like writing your list for the grocery store to go grocery shopping. Even though the sun's in Pisces, it's kind of like, well, I'll just, figure it out when I get there. It's like, no, let's write a list and let's figure it out. Even if you can't figure out exactly what's supposed to be on this metaphorical list, it's about trying to do your best to sit there and think about what you can put on it, even though you know that you're not going to be able to get everything that you want on that list, and you'll make the decisions you need to later on when you get to the metaphorical grocery store. Anyway, this full moon in Virgo is going to be, I don't want to say super revealing, but it is going to be kind of like, hey, what do we need to pay attention to that can sometimes kind of slip our minds? Mercury's, in detriment. It's on top of Neptune. Things are a little bit confusing. Things are also, I want to put the sense of, things are very dynamic right now. Things are very broad and open. It's kind of like, I like using Neptune with dreams, because dreams are very much wild and random. It comes from your subconscious. It comes from like, what you're thinking about that lays in the background of your mind. And with Neptune right here and Mercury right here, Mercury's spitting out this message of Neptune of kind of like, hey, what are the bigger realms of things? What's the bigger idea here? I was talking about that with my Mercury retrograde video, especially because Jupiter's squaring it. However, I just want to hit and emphasize as much as I can on, with this full moon in Virgo and Mercury being in Pisces, like, realize what you have to, but don't, you don't have to go over everything. You're probably going to miss some things, and that's okay. But realize what you can realize at this moment and attend to that. So then, as we move forward into, actually, I lied. I wanted to say one quick thing about this full moon in Virgo too. It is trining Mars, and Mars is now in Taurus at like the very early degrees. And this is going to be a little bit positive, because with Mars now in Taurus, where it's like, hey, where are we taking our actions? Where are we planting our feet? And this is Mars in a fixed sign. We're kind of dedicating our energy to one thing here, one idea. And as this full moon in Virgo trines it, it's kind of like getting ourselves situated to, hey, if we're going to commit to something, if we're going to put our energy into something, it's got to be, precise. We got to be able to see all. It's kind of like before you go on a road trip, make sure you got gas in the car. Make sure you got an oil change. Make sure you have some water in your car in case you crash or something like that. It's just kind of like going over your checklist. So then, as we go into Wednesday on the 20th, the full moon is later going to separate from the sun, and then it's going to start trining Saturn. It's going to start trining Venus. It will be opposing Mercury and squaring Jupiter, where this is going to get a little bit interesting. Where the moon's now in Virgo, it's trining Saturn and Venus and Mars, where it's like things are very constructive. Things are starting to be created in a sense. This is, a Virgo, moon in Virgo trining Venus and Saturn in Capricorn. It's kind of like, here's everything Venus and Capricorn wants to do. The moon in Virgo is kind of like running all the errands to get all of those things that Venus and Saturn need. And so as that's happening, the moon's going to be opposing Mercury. The moon's also going to be squaring Jupiter, where it's kind of like, as the moon squares Jupiter, it's kind of like, hey, do I need to, it's kind of like, don't exaggerate things. It's kind of like, don't blow things over, like, don't look into the analytics, into the detail, and just blow up one tiny spot. It's kind of like overanalyzing one tiny detail and blowing that up into a bigger thing, making up a huge story about that one thing. That's going to be important as the moon squares Jupiter, and as the moon opposes Mercury, where, that one tiny thing may blow up and you may make a whole story about it. Like, do your best to not get caught up in that story, because Mercury in Pisces is going to get really caught up in the imagery of what that can mean, what that symbolizes, what that can create. And so it's not about over questioning things, but going as simple as possible, going as effective as possible, being as mundane and as grounded as you possibly can without over processing things, without making it overly complicated. But then as we go into Thursday, the moon's going to go into Libra and really not do anything. I was like really looking, I'm like, is there anything else that's going on Thursday? But nope, the moon goes into Libra, where it's just about delegating. It's about balancing these things out. And I know that's such a buzzword for Libra, but the whole idea of balancing things out is going, hey, here's here's our list of things. What do we need versus what do we not need? What's more important versus what's not as important right now? And so this moon in Libra is going to be a good time to kind of go, hey, where are my decisions going? What are the things that I realized during this full moon in Virgo? And how can I kind of delegate these things in an easier way to create more of a win-win situation for yourself and who or whatever else that you're working with? Now, as we go into Friday on February 22nd, we have Venus conjoining Pluto, and while that's happening, the moon's also going to be squaring Saturn, squaring Venus, squaring Pluto. And what's important about Venus conjoining Pluto is it's not this, it's not as big as a Venus conjoining Saturn, but Venus on top of Pluto is going to have some depth. It is going to have some, I don't want to say scarcity because it's not the right word, but it's going to feel scary. Like it's going to feel kind of like, ooh, this is a little bit intense. It's kind of like, Venus in Capricorn on top of Pluto reminds me of like a huge company filing for like Chapter 11 bankruptcy, like a nightmare of, just huge responsibilities with, money and what you owe and what you have and your assets and things like that. But however, to kind of give you guys a better analogy for that, Venus on top of Pluto is kind of like, hey, this is what you want. This is what you're wanting to create. Venus had a conversation with Saturn. You're wanting to build, you're wanting to create. What needs to change in order to get to that level? What really needs to change in terms of what you value, what you do emphasize, what you do look at to create joy with Venus in Capricorn? Venus in Capricorn is like, hey, I like the rules. I like to play things by the way that they're supposed to be. I want to be clear on how things work. I want there to be a structure. I want there to be a framework. And as Venus is on top of Pluto, it's like, hey, you can't have the same, you can't just use the same contract scheme over and over. Like, write your own, make a new one for something that's more relevant for you right now. So that is going to be a little bit important, but not the biggest deal. However, on Friday, we also have Mercury squaring Jupiter. And this is going to be one of 3 squares that Mercury is going to make to Jupiter as he makes his retrograde. I just want you guys to remember, though, during this first one is, as Mercury's in Neptune where, again, we're playing with imagery, we're playing with ideas, we're looking at things through different perspectives, and we're kind of being susceptible to our environment. We're not worried about things making sense right now. We're more worried about feeling and understanding the imagery that's, presented in front of us. As Mercury squares Jupiter, it's kind of like going, hey, what's the meaning to this? How do we go a little bit more deeper? What do I believe about this? How do I feel about this? And as Jupiter's in the superior position to Mercury, Jupiter's kind of like, hey, is this the truth? Is this where you want to go? And Mercury in Pisces kind of like, I kind of see both ways right now, and I'm not sure which one to choose. And it's not about choosing right now, but it's about going, hey, let's kind of get out of our bubble for a second. Let's step out of our environment for a second and go, what do I believe? What do I not believe? And just looking at the duality of things for a quick second to kind of check yourself a little bit. And we'll talk more about that too as the weeks go on with Mercury squaring Jupiter. However, after that, on Saturday, we have the moon going into Scorpio, where the moon in Scorpio is going to kind of, it's not really going to intensify things like it usually does, but it is going to oppose Uranus and oppose Mars right as it does that. So it is going to be kind of like, still jumpy. However, as the moon goes into Scorpio, it's going to start to trine Neptune, it's going to trine the sun, it's going to trine Mercury. It's going to actually feel very much like, hey, this moon in Scorpio is helping us get clear about what is it that, what is your truth? Well, Sagittarius, that Jupiter and Sagittarius thing I was talking about is like, hey, what's the truth? What do you believe? The Scorpio part of this with the moon going through there and trining Neptune and trining the sun, trining Mercury is kind of like getting in depth into the dualistic nature, kind of like hearing both sides of the story in depth to really sit with it, see how it feels with you. How does it resonate is a good way to put it. And as the moon goes through Scorpio, again, oppose Uranus, it's going to oppose Mars. As we go into Sunday on February 24th, that's when it's going to trine the sun, trine Neptune, trine Mercury. And then also on Sunday, we're going to have Venus, the Venus and Uranus square start to begin. It's going to be within about 5 degrees. And this is important. It's not the biggest thing. It's going to be more bigger next week. However, Venus is in Capricorn right now where she's liking the sense of stability. She's liking, I want to do things the right way. I want to do things in a constructive way. I want to have rules, a framework, efficiency. As it squares Uranus, Uranus in Aries is going, yeah, but I want to do whatever I want. And so as Venus is squaring Uranus, it's kind of like, okay, where do you have, like, as this starts to build up, expect, like, these Venus things of, like, love, relationships, romance, and value, and fun, and pleasure to kind of have this spontaneity to it and this volatility to it that's kind of like, it's not necessarily you can't get a hold of it or anything like that. However, it is going to be kind of jumpy. It is going to be up and down. So don't expect things to really just go super smoothly with this whole Venus and Capricorn thing once we get towards the end. Expect some, you know, breakthroughs, breakdowns, expect some up and downs and all that kind of good stuff. And we'll be talking more about that next week. However, by the time we get to this video next week, on Monday, we'll have the moon going into Sagittarius, where things start to become a little bit more philosophic. Things become a little bit more, not in depth, but a little bit more dreamy and a little bit more out there and a little bit more adventurous. And we have Venus conjoining the South Node and Mercury leaving its conjunction entirely with Neptune. And I wanted to hit on that too, just because Mercury leaving its conjunction with Neptune really is going to be like, even though things are still a little bit unclear, things are still a little bit foggy, things are still a little bit one way and another, as Mercury leaves Neptune, things are just going to seem a little bit more clear than they have been. But it's not going to last forever. Like, Mercury's going to go a little bit farther, and then he's going to come right back to Neptune, where it's just going to get just as confusing and blurry and weird for a while. So as we get into next week with that happening, like, just realize, like, hey, this is going to be the biggest time of clarity you have for the next couple weeks. However, on Monday, we also have Venus conjoining the South Node. And that's really important because the South Node is like, hey, you know, this is where the eclipses are. We're going to be talking a lot about the South Node and the North Node when we come up into the summer in June and July when we have the eclipses. But the South Node in Capricorn is kind of like, hey, what have we learned? What are we naturally already good at with this Capricorn stuff? However, what part of it do we need to let go of? And what part of it does need to change in order to move forward to the North Node stuff, which is what you need, where you need to take care of yourself, where you need to nurture yourself in those areas. So as Venus goes on top of the South Node, it's kind of like consolidation. It's like, hey, what's really worth my value here, and what can I scrape around with this, and I can use that later, but what do I also need to leave in the past? What doesn't work anymore? And this is about placing that value and placing that emphasis on, yes, this is, I don't want to say like this is goodbye, but this is like, this is what I need. This is what's going to help me when I move forward because I've utilized this, because I've learned this before, because I've liked this in the past. I'm going to like it in the future. Take that with you. But everything else, it's like, hey, dude, I don't value this anymore. This doesn't work for me anymore, and I don't want that. Like, that's Venus and Capricorn in the South Node. Like, I don't want that. So that's what next week is basically going to be starting off with. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for being here and watching, liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. Again, I appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'll be seeing you guys next week.